Hey, thanks for joining me for another episode of Racking Up Rentals. This is episode 211, which means you can find show notes at thoughtfulre.com/E211. If you could just take a second to make sure that you are subscribed or followed or plus or whatever to this podcast, that is fantastic. Make sure you don't miss anything. And it also sends a nice little message back to those platforms that you're listening, and it makes them want to spread the show to other thoughtful real estate entrepreneurs like you and like me. Onward with today's episode. So I realize that today's episode title, Don't Underthink It, is kind of a funny one. It's a little bit like the opposite of what we normally might find ourselves saying, right? Like, oh my gosh, stop overthinking it. Don't overthinking it. So I want to come back to this idea of don't underthink it because it's going to make a lot more sense as we talk through this. So let's put a pin in that. We're going to circle back to it at the end of this episode. So I had this interesting thought recently. I forget exactly what prompted it, but I went out to Facebook as I often do, and I made a post that said, let's say that you have two duplexes and a house. This is what you own as a real estate investor. And you're talking to a seller, and the seller asks you, how much real estate do you own? Which, and that's a real life scenario. Sellers tend to ask that, at least to me, pretty often, right? They're trying to get a sense for who they're talking to and who they're dealing with. And so they might ask you, how much real estate do you own? And I asked the people on Facebook, if somebody asks you that and you own two duplexes and a house, how do you respond to that question? And I got a small array of answers, but they were pretty much focused on number one. People would say, I own 5 doors. That was the number one answer or type of answer was, let me calculate the total number of rental units I have, and that's my answer. I own 5 doors. Other people said, I own 3 properties, right? So 2 duplexes, a house, 3 properties. They denominated their answer in terms of number of properties. Other people said, I just say what I own. I own 2 duplexes and a house. So they didn't really denominate it at all. They just sort of described the portfolio and the inventory. And so as I asked people to tell me why do you choose to answer in that way? The answers to that question were like, one, it's easiest for me to say it this way. Two, the most straightforward answer is the one I want to give. Just the most descriptive or transparent answer is the one I want to give. Some people said, well, I express it in units because that's number's always going to be the largest number. And I want to convey that it's the largest number. I want it to be framed as the largest number. Some people said, I want to label it as denominated as numbers of properties because that number is smaller and I'm more of a humble person. I don't need to brag. I don't need to um, have other people in my business. There were other people who answered this question who said, if the seller asked me how much real estate I own, I would say it's none of your business or some variation thereof, that they straight up would not answer the question and maybe even push back and ask, why do you need to know that? So there's a lot of different answers to this question. And as I was thinking to myself, thinking through the different answers, I have an opinion that all of those answers are wrong. All of those answers are wrong. Now you might say, wow, that's really opinionated of you. And it is my job to have an opinion, but let me explain what I mean. All of the answers I heard, every single answer I heard was about how do I want to express this, not about the audience and how they would receive it. The right answer considers your audience. It considers your audience in lots of different ways. Who is your audience? What do they think about real estate and about real estate owners and about landlords in general? What are their thoughts on this? How do they see themselves? How do you think that they see you? What clues have they given about how they see you? And so there's lots of different aspects of knowing your audience, but we have to take into consideration the audience in deciding how to respond to that. Because the truth is, this question, how much real estate do you own? You could answer that question in multiple different ways, totally honestly. It's not a matter of saying, well, am I going to lie or not lie? There's lots of different ways to answer that question honestly. And all of the people who responded to the post gave honest answers. I have 5 doors. Honest answer. I have 3 properties. Honest answer. I have 2 duplexes and a house. Honest answer. There's lots of different ways, and there's even other ways beyond that, right? You could say I owned $4 million worth of real estate, or whatever, right? I own real estate that generates $30,000 a month in gross revenue and gross rents. You could answer this question in lots of different ways, all of which are equally honest. So it's not about honesty and accuracy. It's about strategy. And so here is my thesis for you. The right way to answer this question is the way that you choose strategically in light of your audience, such that you choose the answer in a way that's going to move this conversation forward, right? So to paraphrase that, the right answer is the one that you think will move the conversation forward, knowing what you know about that seller, knowing what you know about their thought process and their perception of you, while being honest. So let's go through some examples, because this is basically thoughtfulness, right? This is considering the other person, understanding how communication works, and that there's a sending and a receiving, and both matter, and the receiving probably matters more than the sending, and thoughtfully considering how to respond. So let's go through just a couple really simple examples that I can clearly illustrate how you might want to answer this question very, very differently. If the seller you're talking to that has this one rental property that you are talking them about buying, and they only have this one rental property because they used to live in this house and then they moved out and they kept it as a rental so that then their kids could live in it maybe while they went to college. That's the only rental property they have. And they live in a town like my town that's quite liberal and less capitalistic perhaps. And you're talking to this person and you can see that they actually have maybe a little bit of an attitude that says landlords can be bad. Not necessarily landlords are bad, but landlords can be bad. So as they ask you the question, how much real estate do you own? You might synthesize all of those insights and realize in that moment that if this sounds like too much to them, they might kind of put their guard up a little bit and maybe back away from the conversation. So in that moment, you might choose to frame the answer in a way that kind of downplays it a little bit. So you might say to that particular audience in that circumstance, oh yeah, we have a couple properties. We have a house that we used to live in, actually just very much like you guys. You used to live in this one. And we realized that we liked being landlords. And so we ended up buying 2 other duplexes as well. So if you said it like that, you would be effectively saying we have 3 properties, but you'd be kind of explaining the organic nature of how they came into your portfolio. And you're not projecting that you're some big capitalistic landlord. And you're doing that because you know your audience and you're deciding thoughtfully and strategically how to communicate to that audience based on them specifically. And that's a very, very good thing. But let me give you a totally different example. Let's say you're talking to a seller about a house or whatever type of property, and you know that this person actually owns a whole bunch of real estate. And you can tell by the tone in their voice that they're kind of vetting you. They're kind of like looking at you, trying to make sure that you are real, to make sure that you are legit, that you're not a poser, right? And so the tone of that seller's question to you might be, so how much real estate do you own? right? You can imagine what I'm talking about. You can, the person who's asking in an almost cynical way, how much real estate do you own? In that case, you might say, yeah, we have 5 doors at this point, a couple multi units and a house as well. In that case, your own tone might just be sort of matter of the fact and confident. And you're probably going to choose the number that maybe looks the most, the biggest, perhaps, to try to build the credibility, because you can see they're seeking to determine if you have credibility. Those are two totally different sellers, two totally different contexts, same question, phrased to you maybe even the same way, but slightly different tone, right? That first audience, that first seller you're talking to, the ones who just had that one rental property, they might have said, so how much real estate do you own? Right? They might say it like that. There might be this little squint in their eyes, and they're like, oh my gosh, let's hope we're not talking to a bigwig, a shark, or someone who's going to take over our property and kick the tenants out and all of that. But the second one, they're saying, how much real estate do you actually own? Right? That tone is conveying a totally different thing. So the right answer to this question is whatever answer you think moves the conversation forward in light of your particular audience and what you can tell about them. The right answer is not the one that's easiest for me to say. It's not the one that's most descriptive. It's not the one that's most, quote, transparent. It's the right answer there because they're all accurate answers. It's the answer that is most strategic in the communication in that moment. So it brings us back to the title of this episode. Don't underthink it. And as I was processing this conversation, as it was playing out in real time on Facebook, I realized that we underestimate the importance of little things like word choice, like framing an answer, like choosing how we're going to answer a seemingly obvious question, a seemingly simple question. Ostensibly, it just seems like you just say what the answer is. There's no strategy or anything like that. But there is absolutely an opportunity for that. And that means that we tend to be underthinking this. And that's what I ended up writing down in my notes as I was processing this was we tend to overthink the decisions we perceive as being really big and having high stakes. And then we underthink some of the small decisions that we don't even realize are our decisions, right? In this case, a lot of people aren't even realizing that this is a strategic opportunity, that this is a moving of a chess piece in a chess match that is the negotiation between us and a seller. So we tend to overthink some of the things that we think are big, high stakes types of big consequence decisions, but then we underthink the things that actually could have a really big impact on the overall navigation of this negotiation with the seller that are actually super important. So my encouragement to you is to not underthink some of the nuances of what we do in our negotiation. Every word choice is important. This is not to intimidate you and make you feel like, oh boy, does that mean I have to have like a supercomputer for a brain that processes 20,000 different situations before I ever even respond to a simple question in the moment? How do I do that? It's just about developing awareness, realizing a little bit, how is this other person perceiving you? What is their kind of posture? And then making a decision about how to respond in a way that kind of matches the best possible context for that. That is it for today's episode of Racking Up Rentals. Show notes, again, can be found at thoughtfulre.com/E211. If you would like to join us for a Facebook group, did you know that we have one called Rental Portfolio Wealth Builders? We'd love to have you hang out with us over there. You can just go to group.thoughtfulre.com, and we have, with our amazing programmers, trained the magic of the internet to take you right to that page in Facebook. Of course, you could just search for Rental Portfolio Wealth Builders in Facebook, but we'd love to have you come and hang out there. If you would take 2 seconds, I mean, it doesn't have to be fancy, it doesn't have to be long, but a rating and just a simple review of this podcast on whatever platform you like, Apple Podcasts or Spotify, or you're watching maybe on YouTube these days. That's awesome. We're so glad you're here. And the best thanks you could do would just be to give it the rating you think we deserve. If you think we've earned 5 stars, that would be incredible. If we've earned a couple nice comments, that would be absolutely incredible. But it tells those platforms, again, that you're listening, and that makes them want to share this show with other people. So that is it for today's episode. I will see you in the next episode next Thursday. Until then, this is Jeff from the Thoughtful Real Estate Entrepreneur signing off.